There's a kind of madness that sets in when you've tried everything else and it still isn't enough. When you've screamed into pillows until your throat burned and your voice gave out. When you've sobbed so hard your ribs ache, curled up in a fetal position on a floor that feels colder than it should. When you've prayed, sloppy, broken prayers that don't sound like faith anymore, just bargaining. When you've begged the silence to break, begged the universe for one more chance, and begged him. With my heart, with my memories, and with my grief. And nothing answers. Not the phone, not the sky, not the bed where he used to whisper goodnight, not the memories that once gave me comfort, not even my dreams, which now only echo the loss. Nothing answers, nothing shifts, and nothing heals. There's no flicker of relief, and no sign of change, only an increasing pressure inside my chest, a tightening that no matter the amount of tears that come down my face, loosen. It's just the same weight, the same ache, the same silence that somehow gets louder. So I get in my car. Not because it makes sense, and not because it's brave or logical or hopeful, but because staying still feels like dying. Because if I stay where I am, I'm going to come undone, piece by piece, quietly, slowly, invisibly. I turn the hallway light on, because the dark feels too honest right now. I grab my keys. My hands are trembling, and my breathing is uneven. I open the door like a person walking into a storm they already know they won't survive. I sit in the driver's seat, heart pounding. Heart pounding so hard I can feel it in my chest and in my throat. But I turn on the ignition. The engine hums to life, a sound that feels jarringly normal in the middle of my personal apocalypse. And I drive. Not toward a future, not toward forgiveness, not even towards him, but towards the only thing that doesn't feel like I'm dying in this moment. The road. Because maybe, just maybe, if I keep moving, the pain won't catch up to me fast enough to break me all the way. Maybe if I drive far enough, fast enough, long enough, I'll outrun the echo of nothing. I'll outrun the ache that no one else seems to hear. I'll outrun myself, even if it's just for a moment. I double check to see if I have my passport. And I do. So I put my foot harder on the gas and I keep driving. Traveled from Canada to Kansas City. Yep. Yes. Yes, I did. Again. Roughly 1,800 kilometers one way in just over 20 hours. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't sleep. Not once. Not even for a minute. There was no playlist carefully curated for emotional support, no podcast to numb the silence, and no audiobook to distract the ache. There was no highway romanticism, no finding myself on the open road, and no slow motion montage of healing in motion. This wasn't that kind of road trip. This was a woman unraveling, one exit at a time. And yet, something about the drive, that constant motion, that hum of the tires on the pavement, the blur of yellow lines, it offered the smallest illusion of peace for me. Adrenaline surged like a drug, masking grief just long enough to keep the car steady. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel paralyzed. I felt something. Sharp, focused, hollow, but driven. The kind of feeling that tricks you into thinking you're okay because you're doing something, because your body's moving, because your hands are on a wheel and the engine is loud and the road is endless and there's no one around you to watch you fall apart. But God, 20 hours. Do you have any idea how long that actually is? 20 hours alone with yourself, with your thoughts, with your mistakes, with your regrets playing like broken film reels, over and over and over. I wasn't singing along to some hopeful track with the windows down. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My jaw locked, my shoulders clenched. The only music was the symphony of mental warfare happening behind my eyes. I replayed every word he ever said to me, every moment we ever shared, every laugh, every promise, every I love you, every time he called me babe, honey, or soulmate. He had never used those pet names before, so he said, I was the first. And the hardest one of them all, every time he asked me to marry him. And then I replayed everything I had done to lose it all. The silence in that car wasn't silence at all. It was screaming. It was self-hatred. It was desperation. It was, please let this be the thing that fixes it. Let this drive be the grand gesture. Let this be the miracle moment that turns the tide. And somewhere between the border and the Missouri state line, I realized I wasn't even sure what I was chasing. Closure? Hope? Punishment? Salvation? Maybe just the chance to see him, to hear his voice, to prove to myself that he was still real, that we were still real. But what kind of person drives... What kind of person drives 20 hours on a whim, without sleep, without food, without a plan? Just the blind belief that maybe showing up would be enough. A woman unraveling. That's who. It wasn't brave. It wasn't romantic. It was the last gasp of a drowning soul. The car became a coffin for all of the versions of myself I didn't want to face. The liar, the coward, the woman who broke the only thing that ever truly made her feel safe. And the road didn't care. It just kept stretching ahead, cold, indifferent, and infinite. And I kept going. Because what else is there to do? Stay still and die from the noise in my head? Or drive through it, praying that the noise wouldn't kill me first? Every single kilometer, I replayed our life. Every text, every laugh. Every midnight movie night over Discord. The way he used to say my name. The way I used to believe that no matter what we went through, we'd always find our way back. I kept thinking, if I could just get there, just be there, maybe he'll remember. Maybe he'll feel it again. The us in it all. But when I pulled up to the apartment, it was dark. The corner unit of the first floor, the one that I used to call home, even though it never technically was. It looked like a stranger's now. The blinds were drawn, like always, but this time there was no soft glow behind them. No signs of life, no light to greet me, just stillness. And my stomach? It dropped. Hard. Like it knew something before my brain could catch up. I parked and sat in the car, engine humming low, headlights still casting pale yellow onto the sidewalk, like they could somehow illuminate my truth. My hands trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared. I told myself maybe he was out grabbing something. Maybe he was picking up food. Maybe he went for a walk. He loved his late night walks, especially when his head was full. God, I hoped his head was full. I hoped his chest was aching. I hoped he missed me so much it made him restless. That he had to get out of the apartment just to survive the weight of my absence. Because I knew that weight. That weight. It had nearly crushed me every night since he left. Maybe he just couldn't sleep alone in that bed. Maybe he had tried night after night and finally gave in. Called his sister or his mom. Crashed on their couch. Anywhere that didn't echo my ghost. Anywhere that didn't carry the scent of me. Anywhere the silence didn't scream like it did for me. Maybe the walls were talking to him too, whispering our laughter from the nights we watched TV and cried together. Maybe the air still smelled like the perfume that he used to spray of mine. Maybe he was haunted too. God, I needed to believe he was haunted too, because the alternative was that he was just gone. Moved on, living, breathing, laughing, sleeping peacefully, not wondering where I was, not aching the way I was, and that I couldn't bear. I sat outside for hours. I don't even know how long. Time didn't work properly in that moment. It folded in on itself. All I knew was the darkness outside mirrored the darkness inside. I kept watching the windows like they owed me something. Like if I stared hard enough, the lights would flicker on. He'd come home. He'd see me waiting and come down those stairs and open the door and fall into my arms. Like he needed me just as much as I needed him. But nothing changed. No headlights pulled in. No shadows moved behind the blinds. No footsteps on the gravel. Just stillness and silence. And the sick realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken like me. That maybe he wasn't avoiding the apartment because it hurt. Maybe he was avoiding it because I was there. Because he knew I'd come. Because he didn't want to see me. That possibility cracked something deep inside me. A new fracture on the top of the ones I had been ignoring. I kept hoping God. I kept hoping that somewhere deep in his chest, he still couldn't sleep without my voice in his ear. That the darkness scared him too. That he reached for his phone every night and remembered I was gone. That he'd play our playlist and cry. That he still felt like I lived in every corner of that apartment. Because I still did. Every inch of that space held us. That apartment wasn't just a place. It was ours. It was Sunday mornings and coffee and kisses. It was laughing over takeout and making up after fights. It was the way we were. Us. Tangled together in the late hours, whispering dreams, confessing fears, building a world in the quiet. And now? Now it was just a building with no lights on. A place I wasn't sure I was welcome anymore. I sat there begging the universe to give me a sign. Just one. That he missed me. That he was hurting too. That I wasn't the only one who couldn't breathe inside this hollowed out life. But the universe stayed quiet. And so did the apartment. And all I had was the sound of my heart beating. Again. In a parked car. On a dark street. In a city where I no longer belonged. I didn't want to knock. Didn't want to call. Didn't want to force my way into a space that I already felt like it might not be mine anymore. I was terrified that showing up at the door would be one step too far. That it would shatter whatever sliver of grace might still remain between us. That it would feel like pressure, manipulation, desperation. And maybe it was. But God, I was trying so hard not to be that anymore. I was trying so hard to give him space, even while I was just parked a few feet away. So I sat there, in my car, heart racing, holding my phone like it might catch fire in my hands. My fingers hovered over his number, because instinctively, that's still where they went first. Even after everything. Even after the silence and the blocking and the walls he had put up to protect himself from me. Even after I destroyed the safety he once felt with me, my gut still reached for him like he was home. But I didn't press call because I couldn't risk carrying the cold emptiness of it ringing with no answer. Or worse, a voice that didn't sound like love anymore. Or more than likely, the one ring, then voicemail that still proved I was blocked. And I couldn't knock because the idea of him opening the door and looking at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like a mistake, might have killed me right there on the steps. I had already taken so much from him. I didn't want to take more. I didn't want to corner him. Didn't want to make him feel like he had to see me. Didn't want to break whatever fragile healing he might have begun. So I emailed. Something about that felt safer, quieter, like slipping a note under the door rather than kicking it open. I kept it short, because anything longer would have been begging, and I'd already begged enough. On my knees, in my mind, in every prayer, I whispered into the night. So I wrote, hey, I'm in Kansas City. Didn't know where else to go. Are you still staying at the apartment? If not, would it be okay if I stayed there tonight? I stared at those lines for what felt like forever, my thumb hovering over send like pressing it would somehow seal my fate. It was everything and nothing all at once. It wasn't just an email. It was me, holding out a hand. Not for love, not even for conversation, just a place to land. A place that still felt like ours, even if I wasn't part of us anymore. There was no oopsies. Not because I wasn't begging on the inside, but because I didn't want to make him feel guilt. Didn't want him to think I was trying to twist his heart into some kind of reunion. I knew better than that now. I just didn't have anywhere else to go. Not physically, not emotionally. Every other place felt wrong, too loud, too bright, too empty. Only that apartment, his apartment, felt like it could hold the weight of everything I was carrying. So I hit send. And then I waited. I sat there in the darkness, gripping my phone like it was oxygen, like it was hope. Watching the screen for a reply. Watching the minutes pass. Trying to tell myself that even if he said no, I would be okay. That I'd figure something else out. But the truth? There was nothing else. There was no backup plan. No hotel just in case. No friend waiting nearby to swoop in and rescue me. It was him. Always him. And that tiny email, it was a whisper through the ruins. A fragile knock on a door I wasn't sure I still was allowed to stand in front of. Not asking to be let back in, just asking not to be left out in the cold. He replied, and then called. He had gotten a car, and that's why he wasn't there, but he was home now and I could come in. Simple words, but I clung to them like a drowning person clings to driftwood. I grabbed my bag, stepped out of the car, and walked up the steps like I was walking into a dream and I was afraid to wake up from. When he opened the door, my heart stopped. He looked the same, but different. Not in a superficial way. He looked older, tired, guarded, like someone who had built new walls and was still bracing for more damage. And I was the earthquake. We talked that night, carefully, like people walking barefoot through broken glass. Each word was deliberate, cautious, tender, and tense all at once. There was no screaming, no accusations, just the hollow ache of everything that had already been said in silence. Just the echo of what we used to be, trying to make sense of what we had become. We danced around the pain, both of us. Touched it only in moments, when the weight of it pressed too hard to ignore, and then we'd retreat, back to safer things. Like memories. Like laughter that still knew the way out of our throats, even if it trembled on the way up. There were moments that felt familiar, soft, and maybe even warm. Moments where I saw the boy I loved again. He used to call me his person, who fell asleep on Discord with me like it was the most natural thing in the world. He cried. Not all at once, not even at the same time. But tears came like grief does, quietly and then all at once. Mine ran down without permission. His, I think, were carried in the cracks of his voice, in the way he looked away when I got too close to seeing him fully. We held each other. It wasn't like before. It wasn't playful or protective or safe. It was clumsy, cautious, and fragile, like we weren't sure if touching each other would heal the wounds or tear them wide open. And then we became intimate, not out of lust, not out of passion, or romance, or anything even close to celebration, but out of longing, a desperate grasp at something that used to mean everything, a grasp at something that used to make us feel whole. And when I think back about it now, to the way his hands moved, the way he looked at me, the way he didn't look at me, I feel like it wasn't love that guided him. It was anger, or maybe even spite, maybe even grief wearing the mask of hatred, or hatred dressed up like closure. I didn't see it then. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe that just for one night, we were still us. That his body remembered mine, that his skin missed mine, that this meant something, anything, that we still lived in each other, even if everything else had burned down. I clung to the sound of his breath, to the way his chest moved, to the way he pulled me closer and then let me go again like waves retreating from the shore. It was heaven, and it was hell, because for a few hours I had him again. His scent, his warmth, his weight beside me, the quiet rumble of his voice, the shape of him in the dark, all the pieces that used to make me feel safe. But underneath it all was the knowing, the terrible, slow drip knowing that this wasn't a beginning. This was a goodbye dressed up in nostalgia. When we finally turned out the light, we went to bed beside each other. The silence between us was alive, thick, and breathing, and yet the space felt so thin. Like the thread between love and loss was stretched right between us. The distance kept shifting. 1 minute he'd roll closer, his legs brushing mine, his hands grazing my arm. The next he'd turn away. And I'd watch the shadow of his back like it was a closed door I didn't have the key to anymore. I couldn't sleep. How could I? How do you sleep beside the person your soul is still begging for, when every breath they take feels like it might be their last in your orbit? I stared at the ceiling. And when that wasn't enough, I watched him sleep. I tried to memorize everything. The shape of his jaw in the moonlight spilling through the top of the curtains, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his fingers twitched slightly in his dreams like they were chasing something. Maybe chasing me. Or maybe letting me go. I traced the air between us with my eyes, pretending I could hold on to it, pretending that if I stayed awake long enough, the night wouldn't end, that the morning wouldn't come and take it all away. Because deep down, I knew this might be the last time. The last time I'd ever be this close to him. The last time I'd hear him breathe in the dark beside me. The last time I'd get to pretend, just for a few sacred hours, that we were still something. And so I stayed awake. Wishing I could stop wishing I could crawl inside that silence and make it mean something again. Wishing I could live in that ache forever if it meant I could stay next to him just a little longer. Bliss and turmoil, all tangled in the sheets, all carved into my memory like the final chapter of a story I wasn't ready to finish. The next morning we went out for breakfast. It was something we used to do, simple, familiar, and a ritual from a better time. But this time, it was different. This wasn't a lazy Sunday full of sleepy smiles and inside jokes. This was the morning after something sacred and shattering. This was the morning after pretending, however briefly, that we would still touch the past. We drove in near silence. I kept looking over at him, watching the way his hands held the steering wheel, the way his jaw tensed at red lights, the way he didn't reach for the music. We used to always play music. Now the silence between us was too loud, too sharp, too full of the things we weren't saying. At the restaurant, we sat across from each other the same way we used to, but the air felt different. Thicker, like the ghosts of who we were sitting at the table with us, crowding the table. We didn't talk much. When we did, it was polite, careful. Like every word was being measured for weight and risk. Like any wrong turn might cause another fracture. I asked about his new car and he told me it was fine. I nodded and smiled softly. Tried to act like this was normal, like this was casual, like my entire soul wasn't screaming. He looked at me, but not like before. Not like I was the woman he couldn't stop loving. Not like I was the safest place he'd ever known. Not like I was his person. It was a different kind of look now. One full of history, full of grief, maybe even pity, maybe just distance. And I noticed everything. Every flicker of avoidance, every sigh that felt a little too heavy, and every time his eyes met mine, like he couldn't bear what they might find there. I tried to keep my face steady, tried not to let my voice shake when I talked nothing, tried to swallow the hope clawing its way up my throat, because I wanted to believe this was progress, that this breakfast was a beginning, that we were inching our way back to something whole, something worth saving. I wanted to believe that the night before had meant something to him too, that it wasn't just the last flicker of what we were, but a spark, a starting point, a fragile bridge rising from the ashes. I convinced myself that this was a turning point, that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind us, that we were okay, or could be, or might be. Eventually. But deep down, I knew. I knew. In that stillness between coffee refills, in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes for too long, in the way he kept glancing at the clock like he had somewhere else to be, somewhere away from me, I knew that something had shifted. I knew that we weren't rebuilding. We weren't wrapping up. We weren't healing. We were softening the goodbye. This wasn't a new chapter. This was the epilogue. And I felt it in every corner of my body, a low, dull ache beneath my ribs. That quiet, brutal knowing that the man across from me wasn't mine anymore. He might have shared a night with me, his bed, his body, his space, but he wasn't sharing his heart. Not really. Not like before. And no matter how hard I smiled through the pain, no matter how tightly I clung to the hope that maybe we were finding our way back, there was a heaviness behind his eyes I couldn't reach. And a part of me, the part still screaming, please come back, was slowly being drowned by the part that understood. And what did I understand? That he was already gone. I would say some passive-aggressive comments to self-sabotage myself while at breakfast, making things awkward and seal my fate, even though that's not what I wanted at all. And when we got back to the apartment, she looked at me with that heaviness again, the one I had seen the night before and at breakfast, and I could feel it coming. He sat down, and I froze. And then, with more calm than I expected, he told me it still wasn't going to work. He was still too hurt. He couldn't come back from it, and he needed to move forward. I just nodded. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. And I didn't plead. I had made a promise to myself on that drive that I wouldn't make him feel trapped again, that if he told me to go, I would go. And so I did. I packed up everything I had bought, folded up my desperation, my hope, and I left. The drive back felt different, not easier, not softer, not like a sigh of relief or the exhale of closure. No, this was something else, something heavier, something that settled deep in my bones like concrete. It wasn't a journey anymore. It was an unraveling. Again. There was no adrenaline this time, no shaky hope keeping me upright, no phantom belief that maybe this drive would lead me to answers or peace or even a tiny scrape of redemption. This time, I was just leaving, just retreating, back into a life that no longer fit, back into a silence I had tasted and hated and still couldn't escape. I crossed state lines in a daze. Each border felt like another door slamming shut behind me. I drove through cities we used to dream about visiting together, little towns we talked about on Google Maps and said someday, road signs that used to mean possibilities. Now they just mocked me. Because someday has now become never, and us had become me. I passed exits I once fantasized taking with him, stopping for cheap motel nights, gas station snacks and roadside adventures, photos with bad lighting and beautiful memories. I had imagined our future in the glow of these highway signs, and now I passed them like gravestones, markers of a life I was never going to live. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't text updates. Didn't even tell anyone I was on the road. What would I say? That I showed up to a man's life uninvited and still came back empty? That I had finally accepted what everyone else already knew? That he was done? I didn't listen to music either, not because I didn't try. I did turn it on once, just once, and the first few notes of one of our songs filled the car like a ghost I didn't invite, and I couldn't do it. The silence hurt less than the memories, so I drove in silence. And I didn't even cry that much, because sometimes the grief gets so big, so heavy, so all-encompassing. You can't even cry anymore. You just are the grief. I wasn't a person on a road. I was just pain in motion. Time didn't make sense. The hours stretched and collapsed. It felt like I had been driving for days. Like I'd never not been driving. Every single thing played on repeat in my mind, his words. I can't do this anymore. It's still over. You hurt me too much. His voice, tight, guarded, careful, the way his lips pressed into a thin line when I asked, "Are you sure?" The way he didn't reach for my hand, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said goodbye. He didn't hug me when I left, not really, not the way he had before. A kindness, maybe, or a mercy, but not love. And the worst part, the part that hollowed me out even more than the silence and the stillness, I believed him. Even though every cell in my body still screamed for him, even though my heart kept trying to rewrite the ending, I believed him. Because he meant it. Because the softness was gone. Because whatever flicker of hope I was clinging to had burned out in his silence. And so I drove. And I drove. And I drove. Highways blurred into each other, cities melted into shadows. Daylight faded and returned without ceremony. I don't remember stopping for gas. I don't remember eating. I don't even remember what state I cried in, if I cried at all. I just remember the ache, the dull, relentless ache, and how it filled the car until it became part of the engine noise, part of the air I was breathing. I kept replaying the night we had just spent together, the way he held me, the way we touched, the silence afterwards. It all felt like a cruel echo. A replay of a love story that no longer had a heartbeat. By the time I crossed the border back into my country, I was nothing but a shell. Not healed, not clear, just emptied. The road didn't offer me peace. It didn't hold any poetic symmetry. There was no wisdom in the white lines or solace in the sunrises. Just the brutal reality of 1,800 kilometers of pretending I was okay when I was actually losing my mind in the quiet. And when I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a long time. I wasn't ready to walk into a house that didn't know him, not ready to let go of the last place I'd been where he still existed in 3 dimensions, and I had gone there for answers. And I got them. But they didn't sound like closure. They sounded like a door locking shut from the other side. And I was just the one left standing in the hallway, still holding on to a key that would never fit again. There was a strange quiet that came over me somewhere along the drive. Not peace, but clarity. I knew he wasn't coming back, knew this wasn't some temporary break. I knew that I had finally reached the end of the rope I had been gripping for months. And while it broke me, it also gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Certainty. There's a kind of brutal comfort in no longer having to wonder. So thank you for walking this road with me, for riding along through every mile of heartbreak. If you've ever driven somewhere thinking love might still live there, only to leave with more grief than you arrived with, I see you. I know what it means to gamble everything on one last hope, to go all in, even when the odds say you'll lose, and to drive back, knowing you did, but also knowing you survived it. This has been Life After Losing You. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that this episode helps you heal. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please hit the download button. That's the way to help me out the best, and make sure to give me a 5-star review. I would also love if you would be able to share this with a friend or someone you may know that is going through the grieving process. If you haven't, if you could head over to YouTube and hit the subscribe button, that would also help me out in a great way. And remember, be gentle with yourself. You are doing better than you think. I'll see you in the next episode.